Welcome to the lectures on service management principles. I am Grönroos from Hanken School of Economics. The topic is service productivity and as profit management and learning. Now, about productivity, one word of warning is important first. Of all the traditional manufacturing-based management concepts and methods that service has inherited, productivity is the most dangerous one. And it's dangerous because service and product manufacturing are very different. Let's go into it. Now, productivity means how efficiently and effectively a firm's economic output is produced. Now here, efficient operations means how cost efficiently is the firm operating. Effective operations again means what revenues are generated by the operations. What's the quality that is produced and that customers are prepared to pay a given price for. Now that means that managing productivity equals managing the firm's economic results, managing both costs and revenues. Now this means that managing productivity actually is profit management. Now in traditional manufacturing, productivity becomes a shortcut to profit management because of the nature of product manufacturing. So in traditional manufacturing, the productivity concept is about output produced over input used, given a constant quality. And we must remember that the roots of productivity is in traditional manufacturing. All the models and all the concepts really used are based on product manufacturing. Now, the important thing here is constant quality. Productivity works only if the quality of the output doesn't change. Meaning that when input resources or processes are renewed or changed in some other way, management must make sure that the quality of the product remains the same. And that is possible in traditional product manufacturing. This means that productivity, again, traditional productivity is fixed revenues over variable costs. And fixed revenues means that you really don't have to take into account revenue effects when managing productivity because they can, due to the constant quality assumption, be taken for granted. So productivity becomes a matter of managing costs. Now this is how it looks in traditional manufacturing. It's productivity management is mostly a matter of managing cost efficiency. As we can see from the graph to the right in the figure, when costs are decreased through productivity measures, quality remains the same, meaning revenues remain the same and therefore profits go up. And this of course is a wanted outcome of the productivity activities and productivity actions. Now in service, the situation is very different due to the nature of service. For example, the fact that service is consumed as outcome consumption, something that has been talked about in another lecture. If you look at the graph to the right, the same thing happens first. Costs are decreased. But now in service, this leads to a change in the perceived service quality. And normally then quality goes down, meaning revenues go down, which of course leads to a situation where profits go down. So using traditional productivity models, and the concept is dangerous in a service context. Now the reason why quality and revenues go down is because when you change production resources and processes, you easily change the perception of the quality of the service and therefore customers will be less willing to pay for the service. This doesn't have to happen, of course. It is possible to decrease costs in a way that maintains the level of quality or even improves the level of quality. And I'll return to that at the very end of the lecture. But when costs are cut without really taking into account the possible revenue effects through the quality effects, negative outcome very easily occurs. Because productivity and service is, of course, again, output produced over input used, but given variable quality, because the quality changes. In another lecture, we talked about the strategic management trap. And this is something that really has to be taken into account. So, variable quality, and this changes the game. So, productivity in service means variable revenues over variable costs. But the conclusion of this is that cost savings effects and revenue generation effects cannot be separated in service productivity management. Let's look at the retailer who had an in-house call center. Now they decided that it is ineffective having to raise productivity, so 2 persons were laid off. Now the consequences was that people had to call again because they didn't get answers in the first time. They had to wait longer, and the employees had to get quicker answers, which are not always satisfactory. The result was, of course, that in the end, customers started to doubt the quality of the retailer's operations, and they stopped shopping there. It took some time until the retailer realized why they were losing revenues. But then they did that. They realized that it was the call center and the attempts to increase productivity in the call center using traditional thoughts about productivity management. So we have to be very careful with this. Now, the service productivity model includes 2 aspects, both the cost side and the revenue side. Both have to be taken into account. Now, if we look at this model here, start from the left. The input resources and processes are, of course, normal resources used by the service provider. But the customer also influences the service process by his or her knowledge, ability, willingness to do the right things, and so on and so forth. Now, the service process, of course, includes the service encounter in the interactive part, the back office, the support part, and regardless of whether the service encounter or the back office are changed, the quality will change. In the service process, there's the customer alone too, who is then doing things without interacting with the phone sometimes, which also influences here. Now, depending on how the service process functions, due to the input resources, there are effects on both the output quantity and the perceived quality. If one uses too little resources, quantity will go down, but perceived quality easily also goes down because customers have to wait, don't get easily information or service and so forth. So we have to be very careful with both of these. Now, output quantity influences the capacity utilization. If we use too much resources, again, perceived quality may go up, but the resources starts to cost. The input resources start to cost more. So, and perceived quality, well, that has an effect on revenues. So as you can see from the model, to the left, input resources used influences internal efficiency. That is the cost side. Whereas the perceived quality produced influences the external effectiveness. That is the revenue side. And the output quantity produced, depending on how much resources are used, influences the capacity utilization. And all these 3 variables have an effect on service productivity. Service productivity is a function of revenues, costs, and capacity utilization. What this means is that we cannot manage productivity as in traditional manufacturing, only looking at the cost side. But we have to include in the same integrated management process, the revenue side, when we want to improve productivity. And this brings productivity much closer to its origins, profit management. If you remember at the beginning, I said that in traditional manufacturing, productivity management is a shortcut to profit management. Now then there's another aspect of importance, and that is service productivity is a learning process, because services go on over time. A relationship develops, or at least ongoing interactions over time take place between the service provider and the customer. And during this process, both learn, and this has an effect on productivity. So let's look at this. Now, as the relationship goes on, the customer gets familiarized with the service. Customers understand how is the service process functioning. So the customer learns what to expect. And the better match between expectations and experiences create. This leads to higher external effectiveness, because if expectations and experiences meet, perceived quality will normally be considered better, and customers will be prepared to buy and buy at a wanted price with a higher likelihood. On the other hand, when the customers get familiarized with the service, the customer's competence gap also increases. Customers knows what to do, and more intense customer participation is possible. This means that internal efficiency goes down. Service providers do not have to use so much time serving each customer. The customers know better how to go about it. This means cost efficiency increases. To continue, when the relationship moves on, the provider also gets familiarized with the customer. So the provider learns the customer's specific needs and can better tailor its services to the customer. And this has an effect, again, on the match between the customer's expectations or the experiences, and therefore creates a higher external effectiveness. And finally, when the provider gets familiarized with the service, the provider recognizes customers' competencies, understands what the customers can do and wants to do, and can improve those competencies. And then, in that way, help the customer to participate better, more intensely in the service process. And therefore, again, internal efficiency increases. And as we saw on the previous slide, increased internal efficiency, lower costs, increased external effectiveness, more revenues, increases service productivity. Capacity utilization is not included now in this model. Now, this is an important thing to think about when managing productivity in service contexts. It changes over time due to learning. Both the customer and the service provider can learn and will learn, and this should be taken into account when managing productivity. Now, there are some ground rules when developing service productivity. First of all, productivity jumps are normally not possible. It's not possible to do something that will increase productivity a lot at a time, normally. So it's a good idea to think about two types of costs when you start to develop productivity. Very simply put, good costs and bad costs. Good costs are costs that drive revenues. Bad costs are costs caused by bureaucracy and overly complicated processes, which easily develop in a service firm when new processes are laid on old ones, and the old ones are not removed completely, and so on and so forth. Now, good costs should not be removed. Bad costs should be removed as much as possible. And this distinction between good and bad costs is really important and helpful. Now, some ways of improving service productivity, then only a few examples. First of all, of course, start by removing or simplifying bureaucracy and complicated processes. Well, that's rather obvious, but very often it isn't done first. The second thing is try to move the operation to a new technology level. Now, internet banking is the classical example already here, but there are lots of new examples here. Here, one can come close to something that looks like a productivity jump. And then, of course, one can transfer service production activities to customers. But this has to be done carefully, because customers must accept to do the activities that they now are supposed to do. Finally, a few words about how to measure productivity. Now, in service, the only correct way of measuring productivity is to use profit measurements. All other ways are only partial measurements and may be misleading. Of course, profit measurements cannot always be used. For example, when we look at a partial operational process, for example, a back office process, like a kitchen and so forth. However, we must be careful when choosing ways of measuring did the productivity effort create a good outcome or not. Total productivity should always be measured such that both costs and revenue effects are included. Partial productivity, when such processes have been important to take care of, their productivity can be measured in non-monetary terms or with cost measures only. And if we can't do any other measures at the same time, we must always be very careful and take projected revenues effects into account. Because otherwise, we easily develop a partial process in a way that it hurts the customer interface and indirectly creates a negative effect on the perceived service quality and the firm's revenue creating capacity. And total productivity will be hurt then. Now, the next lecture is about people management and internal marketing as prerequisite for successful marketing. Thank you.